Hi folks, it's Brad, and somebody in the comments section asked if I would do a video about Zen and creativity, and I thought I would do that. That thing I talked about last time about annihilating the ego, a lot of people who are kind of creative types worry that if they annihilate their ego, they'll no longer be creative. And I'd like to tell you about how that worked for me for what it's worth. The time that I feel I was most intensely into Zen, I'm pretty intensely into Zen even now, but really getting very serious about it was between like the early 90s and the year 2000. Like I was really getting into it, and I'd met Nishijima Roshi and going to a lot of retreats and kind of really dedicating myself to it, even though I was working a normal 9 to 5, actually 10 to 6 job, and doing, having a normal life and living like a person in Tokyo. But I wasn't in a monastery, but my focus of my life for those 10 years, I think, pretty much was Zen, even though I was doing these other things. Before that, when I was starting from about 8 or 9 years old, I got into making things, like creative making things. So I was into comic books, so I would make my own comic books. I'd fold up some paper and do the drawings and make a cover and make a back cover. None of these exist anymore. They were all terrible anyway. But I was really into them. Later on, I got into making albums, which is I was interested in music and writing music and making songs. So I would record in our basement these albums, and I would put them together just like I was putting together a real album for release, with a cover and a track listing and all of this other stuff, and a certain amount of production values that I would do my best to kind of do on my little cassette recorders that I was using to make them at the time. I wrote short stories too. The main thing about all of this stuff, though, was I didn't have any idea of it going anywhere in terms of selling or being read or listened to by people. I understood that I was a kid, and that it was very unlikely that these albums were going to be sold in stores, or these short stories were going to be published in magazines and whatnot. So I didn't care about that. That wasn't even a consideration. So the albums that I made, there was only one copy of each one. The comic books had one copy of each comic book. The short stories, I never even Xeroxed them and sent them to friends or anything. They would just be in a drawer somewhere or whatever, because I was into the act of creating them. That was the important thing, was making them, and what happened after that, I actually didn't care that much. Later on, when I was about 20 or 21, I'd sent some of these tapes to a record label in New York called Midnight Records, and Midnight Records liked them and signed me to a deal, and I ended up putting albums out on Midnight Records. This is one of them. This is Mirror Mind, Dementia 13 Mirror Mind, and it's flashy and shiny. This is the second Dementia 13 album. I just went in my room looking for it, and it looks like this is the only one I still have. I kind of wish I had copies of the rest of them, but there's this one. So I made these albums, and it was a small label, so I think about 3,000 copies of each album were pressed. And that's nothing. I remember reading about Kiss and how Kiss was considered to be a total failure because their albums, they'd only sold 40,000 or 50,000 copies of each album. That's like 10 times, more than 10 times what my albums were even pressed, let alone sold. But then later on, I found out that the Yoko Ono box set was only made 3,000 copies. So I was like, wow, I sold as many as Yoko Ono. And she had John Lennon on her albums. But at any rate, at this point, things became commercial. So the first 2 albums, I didn't have a whole lot of idea about what was commercial and what would sell. I didn't care. But after the 3rd or 4th one, I started getting concerned, because I was now living on my own. I was out of college. I had to do something to make a living, and I thought, well, what would be really great is to make a living off of these albums. So I tried to make them more commercial and more slick and more appealing, and that didn't work. I think I alienated the original fans of Dementia 13 by becoming too slick, but I didn't pick up any new fans in the process, so it was a total disaster. So I ended up moving to Japan, and to me, that phase of my life was now over. I was no longer the Dementia 13 guy. I wasn't really writing the short stories that much anymore because I couldn't get them published. But after a while, working for Tsuburaya Productions, I decided to kind of revive my dream of being a writer, and I wrote a bunch of scripts and submitted them to Tsuburaya Productions for Ultraman, and none of them got picked up. One got very close to being picked up. It was already in pre-production when they canceled it, but that's a whole other story. And then I started writing novels, and when I was writing these novels, now that I'd done the Dementia 13 project, I had this idea that, well, maybe I can sell these novels. So I was thinking in commercial terms, not purely commercial terms. I wasn't writing them for the money because there wasn't any money, but I was trying to write something that would be appealing to an audience. You know, I was thinking about an audience. And I wrote 3 complete novels doing this, and none of them sold. None of them was picked up by a publisher. So at some point in the late 90s, I decided I really wanted to continue writing and really wanted to continue making music, but obviously there was no audience. And this is where the Zen thing came in, because by then I'd gotten very deeply into Zen, and one of the ideas in Zen that I talk about a lot on this channel is just sitting. So you sit. When you do your zazen, you don't do it for a purpose. You don't do it to improve your life or have enlightenment experiences or for some future thing that's going to happen. You do it for the pure experience of just sitting. So I decided to apply that to music making and writing. And these are the 2 things that came out of that process. One you may know, Hardcore Zen, the book, and one you don't know is called Hovercraft, the album. And both of these projects I did with no intention of anyone ever seeing them. So I was right back to the mindset I had in high school. So I recorded this album. I would wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning and would just go into this little studio that I'd created and record. And then when I came home from work, I'd often record some more. And eventually I made this album. But I had no intention of anybody listening to this. I played it for a couple of friends, and then later on I made a website where I was selling copies of the thing, and I think I sold 4 copies, which to me was perfectly fine, because I ended up really liking this album. For a couple of years, this became my favorite album. I would sit and listen to this record, even though I made it. I don't know if that sounds narcissistic to you, but it makes sense, because, of course, I'm going to record exactly the kind of music that I wanted to hear. So this is exactly the music that I wanted to hear at the time that I recorded it. So I thought it was great, because that's, the music I wanted to hear didn't exist, so I recorded it so I could listen to it. Same thing with this. The book I wanted to read about Zen did not exist, so I wrote that book into existence. And just like with Hovercraft, the album, I had no intention of... I would have been just as happy if this had sold 4 or 5 copies. That's actually, at the time I was writing it, about what I estimated it would sell. I thought maybe I could get rid of 20 or 50 copies of the thing if I Xeroxed it and collated it and whatever and gave it to Tower Records. At the time was accepting self-published stuff for their racks, their book racks in their stores. So I figured I could make 50 or 100 copies, I don't know, and sell them at Tower Records. And that might be the end of it. I actually 50 and 100 when I'm thinking about it. That seems awfully inflated for what I thought. I thought maybe 25 or 10, like I said. The weird irony of this is I did send it out to publishers because I'd failed with those other books that I mentioned, those novels that I wrote, but I knew the process of sending a book out to publishers. So I just decided, what the hell, I'll send this out to a few publishers, and it's only the cost of stamps, it doesn't matter. And I was shocked when Wisdom Publications wanted to publish that. I was just like, what? I didn't expect anything. And when they published it, I didn't expect it to sell. But it did, and things kind of spiraled, and now here you are watching me after all these years because of this effort. In both pieces of work, I used a Zen approach. The being that the approach I took was that I don't care about the results of this action. I only care about doing the thing itself. So I only cared about recording the album itself with Hovercraft, and I only cared about writing the book itself with Hardcore Zen. Didn't worry about who's going to see it or trying to shape it into something that was going to be palatable to a larger audience and blah 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 and all these things you worry about if you're trying to do something commercial. I just made them for myself. So that, to me, is where Zen and creativity go together. It's this idea of, if you want to do a creative project, do the project for the doing of it, and don't worry about the result of it. And I've tried to keep that mindset since Hardcore Zen became successful, and it's been difficult. I can look at my own trajectory of books, and I can see which ones where I sort of succumbed to this idea of trying to write something commercial and then kind of went out of that. And if I look at my book sales, the books where I tried to be commercial are the least selling, and the ones where I didn't give a shit about being commercial sell better. The one exception to that being Zen Wrapped in Karma Dipped in Chocolate, which not enough of you people have bought. That one was very pure and sold like crap, so that's the exception that proves the rule, as they say. I don't know. I never understood that phrase meant, the exception that proves the rule. Anyway, whatever. Don't be a jerk. I thought, well, nobody's going to read this, and that turned out to be my biggest selling book in years. So, there you go. I have no idea what sells. So if you want to know what sells, don't ask me, because I got no idea. Everything is just pure accident when it comes to that. So that's my little thing about Zen and creativity. I think Zen is good for creativity. If you want to contribute to my creativity, look at that. PayPal and Patreon links are below. You can also look at the Hardcore Zen show, which again, not enough of you are looking at, but I think it's pretty good. Thanks a lot. See you later. Bye.